Well, we are here with Georgia Senator David Perdue. Senator Perdue, it's great to have you with us here.
Well, thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure. Of course, you were in the room when this whole, I can't say it, the whole remark or whatever he said came up. But since you were in the room, I wanted you to provide a little context for us about what really took place and what was really said.
Well, it was the second of two meetings this week that the president's had on this topic of immigration. The first meeting was on Tuesday. It was a larger group, bicameral, bipartisan. And in front of the media for almost an hour, he kept the media in there in an open exchange of ideas around how to solve this immigration issue. This meeting yesterday was in the White House Oval Office. It was a smaller group, and proposals were made about how to move forward. Look, I honestly don't remember that word being used, but I do remember the conversation about what's wrong with the current immigration system, and it doesn't protect American workers or our national interests. And so this president really wants to see something. And Tuesday, he defined the scope to include a DACA solution, a border security solution, including a wall, a solution on chain migration, and a solution for this diversity visa lottery.
I just want to be clear about that. You did not hear this expletive that everybody's been talking about like it actually happened.
No, and I'm telling you, there were other members that we've checked our own stories this week, and I'm not the only one that doesn't remember that being said. So no, that's not the issue here. The issue is really the topic. The American people deserve to have a solution to this immigration crisis, and that's what it is today. We have a situation that future immigrants are determined by only one group of people, and that's current immigrants. And that's not against any standard of measure, whether it be helpful to grow the economy or helpful for American interest. It really is simply a measure of family relationships. And there's got to be a better balance between protecting relationships and getting the economy going.
Dick Durbin was out there on TV today saying emphatically that he heard the president say these words. Not only did he hear him say it, but he repeated them over and over again. Is Senator Durbin's account of what happened inaccurate?
Well, you know, I'm not going to get into he said, she said, but I do think that Senator Durbin's heart's in the right place. But I will tell you this, I think what we've had offered up so far is not a viable solution. I don't think it's a serious offer. And the reason is that it does nothing to change the situation that will keep us from being here in exactly the same situation in 5 years. And the situation is very simple to solve. We can solve the DACA issue, but we've got to have some structural changes to how people come into the country. We actually have, Tom Cotton and I have a bill out called the RAISE Act that we ultimately want to go to a merit-based immigration system similar to Canada's and Australia. They've had decades of trial on this. It works. 72% of Americans believe that immigration should be limited to the worker and the spouse and the immediate family. 72%. I can't think of another issue where we have 72% agreement in this country. Actually, almost 60% believe it should be merit-based. So we know this is a topic Americans want to have fixed and fixed soon.
You're very good about staying on message, and I think a lot of folks might wish the president was as effective as you as staying on message. But I did have one more question, because Lindsey Graham has not necessarily, specifically denied what the president said. He said, I said my piece directly to the president yesterday. What is Lindsey Graham trying to say here?
Well, I think Lindsey has been involved in several efforts. We've had 3 efforts in the last 11 years by well-intentioned people to try to solve this immigration problem. The difficulty is the prior efforts have been around solving the comprehensive issue, and that's very difficult to do. So what we brought to the table this year, or last year, is that we felt like if you break the immigration issue down to 3 areas. One is the legal immigration system. We give out 1.1 million legal green cards a year that lead to citizenship. The second area is the temporary work visas. That's 2.2 million work visas that we give out every year. And then the third is the illegal population that are here illegally. Heretofore, what they've done is they've started with the illegals and tried to work back, and that doesn't work. So we believe the first thing we need to do is fix the legal immigration system.
And you think that the chain migration portion of that is the most critical aspect that needs to be reformed?
There's no question. What happens is you get to bring your parents, your siblings, your children, your adult married children, and then your parents get to bring their parents. And so what happens is we have a skewed population of older people coming to the United States, and really going on to our social services that are already bankrupted. So what we need are younger people, talented people, and looking at countries like Canada and Australia, who've been doing this for decades. What they've done is they brought people in at a broad mix, a very diverse group of people that assimilate into the culture and also help grow the economy. This is an economic issue as well as a social and political issue.
When we're talking about the wall, you know, a lot of folks are fixated on this idea of the wall, but how much money do you think it's actually going to take to fund that wall? How much do you think the president can actually get, and what's enough to make his base really happy? Because they really want this wall. A lot of them say if they don't get the wall, there's going to be some sort of revolt.
Well, if people could hear the president consistently every single time he speaks, he talks about 4 things really, but he says, look, you've really got to fix DACA, and the president wants us to fix DACA. He put it back in the Congress's hands, which is where it should be. But any solution to DACA, he says, has got to include a border security issue solved, which includes the wall, and an end to chain migration. He's been very consistent about that. We don't know the total cost. It's going to be somewhere between $15 and $20 billion. The president thinks we can get a lot of that done in 1 year, and I agree with him. In the business sense, I think we could go and get a lot of this done right away. We need to. It's a national security issue. The other thing, though, is that there are enforcement issues behind that. You know, illegal immigration is down this past year, over 60%.
Right.
And the reason is our people started enforcing the law. And so you need more resources to do that, and you need to change a few minor rules so that people don't have loopholes within which to do that. So he's been very consistent. By the way, this is not a 2,000-mile wall. There are places where you can't build a wall. There are mountains and there are rivers and so forth. But we think there's somewhere around 700 miles that actually need some sort of fencing or physical restraint to help protect that border. And by the way, the border wall will work.
Yeah, it's a question of what Trump's base is willing to accept when it comes to this wall, because a lot of them have this idea that there's going to be a wall from border to border.
Well, we already have a wall.
Yeah,
we have a long, some 600 miles of wall right now, and they do work. They're in populated areas, but where we don't have the wall, we see the way that they can be taken advantage of. And so looking at other countries, we know that how they've protected their borders. And look, this is one of the reasons why Congress exists in the first place. The federal government exists is to protect the national defense. And you've got to be able to defend your borders and protect your borders.
Yeah, so it's not as simple as the funding for the wall will equal a DACA deal. It's more complicated than that.
It can't be that. That's not like to like. That's not, there's no symmetry in that. Symmetry is if you want to solve the DACA dreamer problem, the symmetry is you got to fix the chain migration problem
first. Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on. I want to talk about Iran a little bit, because today the president kept some sanctions in play, waived some sanctions, added some new sanctions, but says this is the last chance to fix the Iran deal. Why shouldn't the president just throw out the Iran deal altogether?
Well, there's a primary reason. He's trying to hold the coalition together to keep pressure on the Ayatollah in this regime. We know that, you look at the riots that they had just in Tehran this past week. There has always been a resistance movement there, but the Ayatollah and the current government keep those squashed. Look, we know Iran is a bad player. We've given them every opportunity to become a reasonable player in the world. What the past president thought was if we give them the Iran deal, that they would become more reasonable in terms of their action. What we saw was an increase in funding of Ayatollah and of Hezbollah and Hamas, the Houthis. We interdicted 4 shipments of arms going directly from Iran to the Houthis. They've demonstrated no willingness to reduce their support of terrorism. In addition, the missile testing we believe is in violation. We also believe there are other violations. So this is the president giving them one last chance to see if we can change their behavior before we pull the plug. That deal should have never been signed. It should have been a treaty. This president shouldn't be in this position, and he wouldn't have been if the last president hadn't withdrawn America from its responsibility around the world.
Well, I know you're on the Armed Services Committee, and so this is an important issue to you. I want to talk a little bit more about the Middle East. This issue with Iran obviously sheds light on how volatile the region is. Meanwhile, you know, with long-standing allies like Qatar and Saudi Arabia, which seem to be at odds as well. You know, we've got a proxy war in Yemen between Saudi Arabia and Iran. But what can America do to kind of strike a balance to make sure that we're not offending one of our allies? Because if we tip the balance there, the whole thing could go.
Well, you raise a very important question. It's a great issue. This president, though, has already done the first thing, and that is he's re-engaged. As a member of the Foreign Relations Committee for the past couple of years and now on Armed Services, I've been around the world meeting a lot of these leaders, and their first request of a new president was, please, we need America to lead again. That doesn't mean we need 100,000 troops on the ground in Syria, but we need America to help form the impetus to stop Iran and to stop Russia. Now, the second to that, I will tell you this, I believe the world's more dangerous than any time in my lifetime. I've lived in Europe and Asia and worked all over the world. I'm very concerned about that. At the same time, our military is in a weak position. 2/3 of our FA-18s can't fly today. Only 3 of our 58 Army brigades can fight tonight. We've got nuclear submarines in dry dock waiting on major maintenance. This is a situation where we have allowed our military to get to a position of readiness. It's not acceptable. So General Mattis has said the #1 threat to our national security is our own debt. And the reason that's the case is that it doesn't allow us to rebuild our military. So we're right now in a phase where we're trying to rebuild readiness in the military, look at long-term recapping our military, but then in some shoulder season between 3 years and 15 years, what can we do from a low-cost standpoint to stand up to these new challenges?
Speaking of challenges, we've got this whole issue with North Korea. And recently, in an exclusive interview with Newsmax, former CIA Director James Woolsey said that perhaps North Korea could strike the United States right now with a satellite and some sort of electromagnetic bomb that could take out 90% of the population. Is that a concern to Congress?
Well, an EMP doesn't take out the population, it shuts down the infrastructure. And that's
affect 90% of the country.
It would definitely affect 90% of the country. And we think they have that capability. The problem is that right now we need help in terms of dealing with North Korea. The president has done a great job with President Xi in China by putting pressure on there to get help, and we're getting some now. And now the movement is to try to get Putin in Russia to help as well. I don't think anybody in the neighborhood over there wants to see a nuclear weapon on the peninsula of Korea.
But we got to ask more from China. They're not doing enough. Even the president has admitted recently that China's not doing enough. How do we get them to do more?
Well, there are two ways to deal with the Chinese. One is you can put pressure on, and sometimes that works, and a lot of times it doesn't. I think right now we need to align our interests, and it's just that simple. Both these presidents, President Xi and President Trump, have similarities. They really do. And President Xi now has consolidated his power. I think we have two leaders now that can put China and America on a path toward cooperation while still protecting each other's own national interest, which includes a solution for North Korea.
Well, we'll wrap it up here. I know you're short on time, but I read recently you had a chance to play golf with President Trump. Actually, you were rubbing elbows with our CEO, Chris Ruddy, over there at the Trump golf course. What kind of golfer is President Trump? What's he like to play with him?
He's a serious golfer. He wants to win every time. He will grind you in the ground. He can putt.
Does he talk smack when he's playing?
He talks smack, but he talks business. I mean, I worked all day. I got home that night and I was exhausted. I mean, the man works all day. And this is what most people don't know about this president. Chris and I talk about this occasionally. This president probes and asks questions, and then he listens. And you think he's not listening to you, but then you hear him come back with it a week or two later. He's a serious golfer. He needs that relaxation, but he works the entire time he's out there.
I know a lot of guys that do a lot of business on the golf course. It's a great place to get things done. Senator David Perdue, hope you can get out there a little bit more. I know you're a busy guy, but it's great to talk to you, and thanks for visiting us here.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.